There is a trouble most people carry silently for years, quietly adjusting their days around it, quietly embarrassed by it, quietly buying things that half work or do not work at all, and never once saying out loud what the actual problem is. I am going to say it out loud today. I am going to talk about a sluggish gut, about being blocked up, about the ordinary misery of a body that simply will not move the way it is supposed to. And I am going to talk about it the way people used to talk about such things, directly and without apology, because there is nothing in this worth whispering about, and a great deal that can genuinely be helped. My name is Dr. John, and I want to be clear with you from the very beginning so there is no confusion later. I am not here as your physician today. Nothing I am about to share treats a disease, a serious condition, or anything that a trained clinician should be managing. What I am talking about is the plain, ordinary sluggishness that most people carry around with them, the kind that comes from how a person eats and sits and drinks and lives, that kind, not the other kind. And I will tell you clearly and precisely how to tell the difference, because that distinction may be the most important thing in this entire conversation. If you are already under a physician's care, if you take medications regularly, some of which can slow the gut down as a side effect, then bring what I share today to the person who knows your full picture. Do not let a video substitute for a conversation with someone who has examined you. That said, let us begin, because I believe that when you understand why this happens, not just that it happens, every single remedy I am about to give you will make complete and obvious sense, and you will never need to be confused about it again. Here is the plain truth of what is happening inside the body when this trouble takes hold. Your gut is a long muscular tube, and its whole purpose is to keep things moving. It does that by squeezing and contracting along its length, pushing what is inside it steadily forward. And what is inside is meant to be soft, bulky, and moist enough to move without resistance. When those conditions are met, the body handles everything without a thought, and you never give it a second consideration. The trouble begins when those conditions break down. And there are really only a handful of ways that happens. The first is that the waste inside dries out. As material passes through the lower gut, the body reclaims water from it, which is entirely normal and necessary. But if the body was short of water to begin with, it reclaims too much, and what is left becomes hard and compact and dry. A dry, dense mass does not slide. It does not move easily through a tube that expects something soft. It resists, it stalls. And the longer it sits, the drier it becomes, and the harder it is to move. The second breakdown is a lack of physical bulk. The gut moves things by having something substantial to grip and push. When a person eats mostly refined, processed food that has been stripped of its fibrous structure, food that dissolves almost immediately into nothing in the digestive tract, the gut has very little to work with. The muscle contractions have nothing to grab onto. The whole system goes idle and sluggish because there is simply not enough material to push. The third breakdown is the stillness of the body itself. The gut is intimately connected to physical movement. When the body walks, shifts, bends, and works, the gut keeps pace. The muscles of the abdominal wall press gently inward. The whole core flexes and releases, and all of that mechanical activity helps the gut along. A person who sits motionless for the majority of the day removes that help entirely. The gut slows down to match the body it lives in. And the fourth breakdown is the one almost nobody ever considers and almost everyone contributes to in the course of ordinary daily life. It is about rhythm and timing and a habit that has been quietly trained in the wrong direction. I will come back to it in detail because it deserves its own full explanation. So there it is, laid plainly. Not enough water, not enough bulk, not enough movement, and a rhythm that has gone wrong. And every single thing I am about to tell you addresses one of those directly. Not as magic, not as miracle, not as a supplement that costs you $30 a month. As a plain answer to a plain problem. Let us go through them. Water is where everything begins, and it is also where most people's understanding of this problem is most completely wrong. The connection between how much a person drinks and how well their gut functions is not subtle or indirect. It is immediate and mechanical. When the body does not have enough water circulating through it, it does what it must. It pulls water back aggressively from the contents of the gut, leaving behind something dense and difficult. When the body is well hydrated throughout the day, it does not need to scavenge water so desperately from that source, and what passes through remains soft and manageable. This one adjustment alone, simply drinking adequate plain water consistently across the entire day, relieves a significant portion of the ordinary constipation that people experience. Not herbal water, not flavored drinks, not tea or coffee, which are diuretics and actually increase fluid loss. Plain water, moved steadily through the waking hours. It is genuinely that straightforward for a great many people, and it is the first thing to attend to before anything else is tried. There is also a particular timing that matters here, and it is worth holding on to. A warm drink taken first thing in the morning, before food, before anything else, before the day has properly begun, has a specific and reliable effect on the gut for many people. The warmth, the timing, the fact that the stomach is empty, all of it together seems to wake the system and set it moving. It may be warm water with a wedge of lemon, it may be a plain morning coffee. The exact nature of the drink is less important than the habit itself. First thing, warm, before eating. The people who built this habit did not do it because they read about it somewhere. They did it because it worked, and they kept doing it, and it became part of how a morning was shaped. Now to the matter of bulk, which the older generation simply called roughage, and which nobody needs to dress up in complicated language. The gut is a muscle, and a muscle needs resistance to work properly. That resistance, in the context of digestion, is fiber. It is the parts of food that do not break down completely in the digestive process, the skins of fruit, the outer bran of grains, the structural fiber in vegetables, the cell walls in legumes and beans. These things pass through largely intact and give the gut's muscular contractions something solid to grip and move. When all of that has been processed and refined out of the food, when what a person eats is almost entirely soft and dissolved by the time it reaches the lower gut, the system becomes lazy because there is nothing to demand its effort. The fix is not complicated, and it does not require specialty products or expensive supplements. It requires eating food that is close to the form it grew in, fruit with the skin left on, vegetables eaten often and in real quantity, whole grains rather than the stripped, white, refined versions. Beans and lentils, which are extraordinarily rich in fiber and among the most under-eaten foods in the modern diet. These are not exotic prescriptions. They are ordinary foods that used to be the whole of what people ate, before processing became the norm and stripped everything of its rough structure. Among all of them, there is one that stands apart for this particular purpose, and it has been known and used for this purpose for generations without exaggeration or mythology. It is the dried plum, which most people call a prune. There is nothing invented or fashionable about it. Prunes work. They work gently, reliably, and without the dependency or side effects that accompany most commercial interventions for this problem. A small handful of prunes, or 6 to 8 of them, soaked in cold water overnight and eaten first thing in the morning, very often handles the entire problem by themselves. It is not glamorous. It does not come in a branded container with a seal that promises transformation. It comes in a bag and it sits on the shelf and it works. Before anything else is reached for, the prune is worth trying in full seriousness. There is one caution with roughage that is not optional to mention because ignoring it makes the problem worse rather than better. Fiber, particularly in larger quantities, requires adequate water to function properly. Without water, a large increase in fiber intake creates a bulkier, denser, drier mass that is actually harder to move, not easier. The fiber and the water must come together. They are not separate remedies. They are one remedy taken in both of its necessary parts at the same time. Movement is the third fix, and it is the one people almost never connect to this particular problem, even though the connection is entirely obvious once it is explained. The gut does not work in isolation from the rest of the body. It is embedded in the abdominal cavity, surrounded by the muscles of the core, sensitive to the mechanical activity of the whole body. When the body moves, it walks, it lifts, it bends, it climbs stairs. The gut is stimulated along with everything else. The light internal compression of walking, the gentle rhythmic activation of the abdominal muscles, the increased circulation to all the organs, all of it helps the gut along. A body that stays seated for most of the waking hours gives the gut nothing to work with except its own mechanical effort, and that effort alone, without the help of body movement, is often not enough to keep things moving on schedule. The fix is walking. Not strenuous exercise, not athletic training, not a gym membership. Walking, a genuine daily walk, long enough to be real, is one of the most powerful and completely overlooked remedies for a chronically sluggish gut. Many people who have struggled with this problem for years and tried every commercial solution available find that a simple daily walk, done consistently, does more for them than anything they have purchased. It works for this reason the same way it works for blood pressure, for sleep, for mood, for joint pain, for circulation. The body was designed to move through the world on its own feet, and nearly every system inside it, the gut included, functions better when it does. Here is the one that surprises people most, and I am going to speak about it directly because to speak around it defeats the purpose. It has to do with posture, specifically with the position a person is in when they sit to relieve themselves. For most of human history, across virtually every culture on Earth, people eliminated in a low squatting position, close to the ground, knees drawn up toward the chest, the whole pelvic floor in a different configuration than the seated position, and the body is built for that configuration. The internal angle of the lower gut, the muscle that must relax completely to allow easy passage, the alignment of the whole passage from the colon downward, all of it is optimized for the squatting position. The modern seated toilet places a person in a position more like sitting in a chair, with the knees roughly at hip level, and in this position the internal angle is not fully released. The lower gut is kinked slightly, the muscle remains partially contracted, and the body has to work against its own architecture to accomplish what should happen naturally. The remedy is a small footstool placed on the floor in front of the toilet so that when a person sits, their feet rest on it and their knees rise above hip level, mimicking, imperfectly but usefully, the old squatting posture. This is not a theoretical suggestion, it is a mechanical one. The body's alignment changes, the internal angle opens, the passage becomes easier. A great many people who have made this single adjustment report that a problem they have struggled with for years became, almost immediately and remarkably, easier. It costs almost nothing. It requires no prescription, no supplement, no follow-up. A stool under the feet, knees elevated, and the body does what it was built to do. The discomfort in even raising this subject is part of why it stays so underused. People do not mention it, and so people do not try it, and so people who would benefit enormously from it continue suffering unnecessarily. The last of the plain fixes is about rhythm, and it is the one that, in my experience discussing this with people, surprises them most because they had never once thought about it in these terms. The body is a deeply habitual machine. It runs on rhythms. The sleep cycle, the hunger cycle, the hormonal cycle, the temperature cycle that rises and falls across the day. The gut is no different. It has its own rhythm, its own internal schedule, its own predictable window of peak activity. In most people, that window falls in the morning hours, shortly after waking, and is amplified by the very things I have already mentioned: warm liquid, some movement, some time upright. When a person consistently responds to that window, consistently uses those morning hours as the time to attend to this business, the body learns the pattern, it begins to prepare for it, the rhythm deepens. Going becomes easy and reliable and something that simply happens without effort or anxiety. This is not wishful thinking, it is how the gut actually trains and responds over time. The flip side of this is equally important and more commonly ignored. When the body signals that it is time, there is a biological window. The rectum fills, the internal pressure rises, the signal goes out, and the body is ready. If a person ignores that signal, if they decide they are too busy, or that now is not a convenient time, or that they would rather wait, the signal fades, the body reabsorbs the signal, reabsorbs some of the fluid, waits. And the next signal is longer in coming and arrives when the material is drier and harder to pass. People who make a consistent habit of ignoring or postponing this signal teach their bodies, over months and years, to produce less urgent and less effective signals. They train themselves into difficulty without ever meaning to and without ever knowing the mechanism. The rule is plain and should be made a rule. When the body signals, respond to it. Stop what you are doing. Go. Not after the meeting ends, not after the email is sent. When the signal comes, that is the time. That rule alone has changed the situation for more people than most of them expected it to. I want to tell you about something I observed growing up, and I think it is the most useful thing I can offer because it wraps all of this together in a way that no list of tips ever quite manages. My grandmother on my father's side lived until she was 91. She was vigorous and regular and healthy in her gut until the very end, and not because she was lucky, though perhaps she was lucky in some ways. She was regular because of how she lived. She drank water, not sparkling water with flavoring, not bottled drinks, not sugary things. Water and the occasional plain tea. She ate food that she recognized as food, food that grew in the ground or came from an animal and had not been transformed beyond recognition in a factory somewhere, vegetables from the garden, fruit from the tree with the skin on it, beans and legumes and rough grains. She walked every day because walking was how she got from one place to another. She was up at the same hour every morning of her life, and she was to bed at the same hour every evening, and her rhythm was as steady as a clock. And she went when she needed to go, and she never once thought about whether now was convenient. It never occurred to her to make it inconvenient. She did not have a remedy for constipation because she did not have constipation. She had a life that made it impossible. And that is the point I want to lodge in you, not as sentimentality, not as nostalgia for a simpler observation. The reason this problem is as common as it now is, affecting a very large portion of the population in the industrialized world, is not that something has gone wrong with the human body. The body has not changed, the life has changed, the food changed first. It became soft and processed and stripped of its roughage. Then the water changed, replaced by drinks designed to be consumed rather than to hydrate. Then the movement vanished, replaced by seated work and seated leisure and seated transportation. Then the rhythm went, dissolved into schedules that have no room for the signals the body sends. Every single one of the fixes I have told you about is simply a piece of the old life being put back in, not a remedy, a restoration. And restoring even part of it, even 2 or 3 of those things done consistently, very often restores the function that was lost without any other intervention at all. Now I need to give you the part that responsible people do not skip, and I will not skip it either. Most constipation is what I have described. It is ordinary and fixable and responds to the things I have told you about, but some constipation is not that, and the difference matters enormously. If you are someone who has been regular for most of your life and your bowel habits change significantly and that change persists for more than a few weeks, do not try to fix it at home. See a physician. A sudden, lasting change in bowel behavior is something a trained clinician needs to evaluate because it can sometimes indicate a cause that no amount of prunes and walking will address. If you notice blood, either visible in the toilet or darker, tarry material in the stool, you stop managing at home and you go and see someone without delay. Blood has many explanations, most of them minor, but not one of them should be guessed at from your kitchen. If the constipation is accompanied by significant pain, not ordinary discomfort, but genuine abdominal pain, or by a bloated, rigid abdomen, or by vomiting, those are urgent signs and the urgency should be respected. And if you are losing weight without intending to, or experiencing unusual fatigue alongside this problem, or if it simply will not respond to any of the straightforward measures I have described after a fair and sincere effort, that is a sign that the ordinary explanation may not be the right one. I tell you these things plainly because I know how the embarrassment of this subject makes people delay seeking help. The discomfort of talking about it leads people to sit with it far longer than they should, and for the ordinary kind, that patience is fine. For the other kind, it is not. Learn the signs, take them seriously, and let them override your reluctance to raise the subject with your doctor. There is one more thing worth saying, and it is something I think about when people ask why the plain remedies are not the first thing they hear about when this problem comes up. The answer is not complicated, and it is not a conspiracy, but it is a reality, and it is worth naming. Water costs almost nothing, prunes cost very little, walking costs nothing, a small stool for the bathroom floor costs a few dollars and lasts a lifetime. Training a rhythm costs nothing but consistency. None of these things can be turned into a scalable commercial product. None of them can be placed behind a brand and sold at a margin. There is no patent on drinking enough water. There is, however, a very large and very profitable market in products that stimulate the gut chemically or mechanically from the outside. Laxatives of various kinds, fiber supplements in branded packaging, probiotic pills at premium prices, prescription interventions. Some of these products have genuine uses in specific situations. But the strongest category, the stimulant laxatives that force the gut to contract when it otherwise would not, carries a real and underappreciated risk for the ordinary user. The gut, used to being forced, gradually loses its own ability to initiate movement independently. The very mechanism that should work on its own, that was working on its own before the intervention began, becomes dependent on the external force. The person who reached for the bottle because they were occasionally constipated finds themselves unable to go without it. The original problem, which was ordinary and fixable, has been replaced by a different problem that is harder to reverse. The plain fixes do not do this. They strengthen the gut's own function rather than substituting for it. That is not a small thing. That is the most important practical difference between them. But because one can be sold and the other cannot, you hear about the one that can. So here is what I would have you do, and it is small and it is manageable and you can begin today. Drink more water, plain water, steadily through the waking hours, and begin each morning with something warm before anything else. Eat food that still has its roughness in it, the skins, the fiber, the grain. Give prunes a genuine and consistent try, soaked overnight, eaten in the morning, before you move on to anything else. Walk every day. Not a marathon, not an athletic program, a walk, a real one. Put a small footstool in the bathroom and use it every time so your knees are elevated and your body is aligned the way it was built to be. Pay attention to the signals your body sends and respond to them promptly. And if you do all of these things together, which is how they work best because they are all addressing the same underlying situation from different angles, give them a full week before you judge them. The body takes time to respond to consistency, and you should give it that time before concluding that it has not worked. And carry with you the signs I named, the sudden lasting change, the blood, the real pain, the unintended weight loss. If any of those appear, put aside the home remedies and go and see Dr. John, or whoever your physician is, and do not let pride or embarrassment stand in the way of that. The plain fixes are for the plain trouble, and they are genuinely sufficient for most of the people who need them. But medicine exists precisely for the situations where plain is not enough, and the wisdom is in knowing which situation you are in. Come back and tell me what made the difference for you. I am particularly curious about the stool because in my experience it is the one that surprises people most, the one they try last and wish they had tried first. And the next time we talk, I want to go deeper into the internal world of the gut itself, the living ecosystem inside it, the way that ecosystem is shaped by everything a person eats and does, and the ways in which the old way of eating served it better than almost anyone understood at the time. But for today, hold the plain thing tightly. This is not a complicated problem, and it does not require a complicated answer. It requires water and roughage and movement and posture and rhythm, and above all it requires the willingness to take the body's own signals seriously rather than scheduling them for a more convenient time. Your gut will work. It was built to work. Give it what it needs and get out of